Dude, did you hear what Winona Ryder's doing?
In December 2001, security cameras at Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills recorded a small, dark-haired woman slipping designer goods into her bag.
This is worse than that Winona Ryder thing.
Within days, that grainy footage was bigger news than the War on Terror, and the most beloved actress of her generation became a national punchline. If you only have 30 seconds, here's the bottom line of this video.
There's a certain kind of spooky that appeals to me.
Winona Ryder became famous by being everything the 80s and 90s said a leading girl could not be. Small, pale, dark, bookish, visibly nervous, and just incapable of pretending otherwise. Her secret was that she never performed confidence. Millions of women looked at those enormous brown eyes and recognized themselves for the first time. Oh, and how men adored her.
Bizarre because it's almost, with him and me, it's almost as if it's like telepathy because we really are on the same wavelength. It's like we're having such a good time. I don't know if we really need, a piece of paper right now to...
She was the anti-blonde in a Hollywood built for blondes, and she made fragile sensitivity look like the most glamorous thing a woman could have. But if you'd like a bit more of an explanation, follow me. Welcome. I'm Kira, and this is your beauty blueprint. I've spent a whole week researching, watching, and editing all things Winona to bring you her very essence and share the best of my findings. And this one took me places. A commune with no electricity, a psychiatric clinic, the top of a 200-foot redwood, and the most infamous department store dressing room in American history. There is a love story with a tattoo that had to be surgically edited, and a stolen script, or maybe not, involving a certain future wellness mogul. And there is a supporting actress who walked into Winona's own passion project and walked out with her Oscar, her spotlight, and some would say her decade. If you watched my Angelina Jolie video, you already know how that story ends. Today, we see it from the other side of the ward, and stick around, because by the end of this video, I'll serve us a quick practical breakdown of what we can learn from Winona Ryder's style universe. The hair, the brows, the lashes, all of it. One more thing before we begin. I designed a Winona-inspired t-shirt just for us, and once you hear the story behind its inspiration, you will understand why I could not resist. It's ultra soft and very wearable, made for exactly the kind of person who'd happily watch a video like this one. It took a while to finish because of my damn perfectionism, but I am so happy with how it turned out. They ship super fast, to and fro all over our little globe, and nothing makes me happier than to hear from you when you get one. I've now designed quite a few t-shirts featuring a whole lineup of the icons we've covered on both channels, and they're waiting for you in my store. Go adopt one. They get lonely. Now, settle in. Pour yourself something fitting for the occasion. For Winona, that means one of two things. A black coffee, bitter, the cigarettes and coffee mood of the decade. Or, if you want the documented option, a Shirley Temple with a side of fries, because that is exactly what she ordered during her interview cover story in 1990, at the height of her fame, like the world's most expensive 12-year-old. To understand the face, we first have to understand the girl. So here's a tiny backstory. Winona Laura Horowitz was born on October 29, 1971, in Winona County, Minnesota, and yes, she is named after the place. Her parents were living in a rural farmhouse. The nearest city was Winona, and so Winona she became. The middle name honors Laura Huxley, wife of Aldous Huxley, family friends, which tells you everything about the household we are dealing with. Have you read any of Aldous Huxley's books, by the way? Brave New World is rightfully a very famous one. Well, Winona's father, Michael Horowitz, was an author and antiquarian bookseller who worked as the archivist for Timothy Leary, and Timothy Leary, the high priest of LSD himself, became her godfather. Allen Ginsberg came around, so did Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Philip K. Dick. Her parents co-edited an anthology of women's writing on drug experiences that included a piece by Louisa May Alcott, the very author whose Jo March their daughter would one day play. Sometimes life writes its own foreshadowing, and because you know this channel, you know we have to look up. Winona is a Scorpio, and not a casual one. Astro Databank, which gives her birth time its highest reliability rating, sourced through astrologer Frank Clifford, records a morning birth that produces a Scorpio sun, a Pisces moon, and a Sagittarius rising. If it is right, it is almost comically on the nose. She carries a Scorpio stellium, Sun, Mercury, and Venus, all clustered in the sign of intensity, privacy, obsession, and transformation, with Mercury and Venus conjunct, a mind that cannot think without feeling, and cannot love without thinking. The Pisces moon is the porous one, the moon of people who absorb the emotional weather of every room and pay for it later, and Sagittarius rising adds the restless seeker, the eternal outsider scanning for the exit. An interpretive lens, not a verdict, but keep that Pisces moon in your pocket. It is going to explain a great deal. When Winona was 7, the family moved to a commune called Rainbow in Mendocino County, California. 300 acres, 7 other families, no electricity, no television. What does a strange and tense little girl do with no television? She reads, of course. Her favorite book was The Catcher in the Rye, reread the way other children rewatched cartoons. Her mother screened films in a barn, and it was there, watching John Cassavetes' movies flicker against the dark, that she first fell in love with acting. Not with stardom, with acting. The raw, nervy, Gina Rowlands kind. Hollywood never quite forgave her the distinction. By the way, just in case you didn't know, I have a second channel now called Old Hollywood Blueprint, where I cover people like Gina Rowlands, and I create a modern take on their iconic makeup looks too. Well, so there is a darker thread in Winona's childhood too, and I am not going to skip it. Her father's family were Ashkenazi Jews from Romania, Russia, and Ukraine, and relatives did not survive the Holocaust. As a small child, she was so haunted by this that she slept on the floor outside her parents' bedroom and compulsively checked Holocaust books out of the library, in her words, looking for her family, for someone she recognized. When people later called her performances fragile, they were seeing something real, and it had roots. At 10, the family moved to Petaluma, and her first week at junior high nearly ended her. She showed up in an old boy's suit from a Salvation Army shop because she wanted to look like the kids in Bugsy Malone, and a group of students mistook her for an effeminate boy, shouted a slur, slammed her head into a locker, and kicked her while she was down. She was briefly homeschooled after that, and later said she was regarded as the school freak, which reinforced every doubt she had about herself. Hold on to this image, a girl beaten for wearing menswear, who would grow up to make thrifted menswear one of the most copied it-girl looks of her era. The blueprint was already there. The world just hadn't caught up yet. She studied at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and her first audition tape was a monologue from Salinger's Franny and Zooey. Because of course it was. She lost that role, but the director cast her in Lucas, her film debut, and when they asked how she wanted her name on the credits, a Mitch Ryder album happened to be playing in the background. Horowitz became Ryder on the spot, a stage name chosen by vinyl and chance. Then came 1988, and Tim Burton and Beetlejuice. Lydia Dietz, the death-obsessed teenager in black, was barely a costume for her. She has described her actual teenage self in almost identical terms. Dressed all in black, blue-black drugstore-dyed hair, bangs she had cut herself, so they were really jagged. Burton did not transform her. He pointed a camera at what was already there, and she knew it, saying that Burton really gave her a career, because Hollywood would not have known what to do with her. And then Heathers made her the patron saint of every smart girl who hated her high school. She was not the first choice. She fought for the part, even submitting to a Macy's makeover to prove she was pretty enough, which is one of the most savage sentences I have ever had to say on this channel. Another director actually fired her from a different film after seeing Heathers, because the movie offended him. Imagine being fired for the exact thing history would glorify you for. Now, are you keeping count of the coincidences yet? Stay with me, because in a few minutes I will tell you how a cancelled trip to Rome accidentally created one of the great Gothic romances of 90s cinema, and it hinges on a script she was carrying around like a talisman. And if you're enjoying this so far, this is your moment. A like and a subscribe tell the algorithm that stories like this deserve an audience, and they cost you nothing but a little flick of the thumb. First though, the boy. At the premiere party for Great Balls of Fire in 1989, 17-year-old Winona met a 25-year-old actor named Johnny Depp, and 5 months into dating, they were engaged. He told People magazine there had been nothing in his 27 years comparable to the feeling he had with Winona, and then he made it permanent, tattooing Winona forever on his arm. They were the couple of the era, 2 pale, dark, beautiful creatures in leather jackets, and Tavi Jevinson said it perfectly years later, that nobody can match how it feels to see pictures of teen Winona and Johnny Depp holding hands in leather jackets. Nobody can. That is so much more than nostalgia. In 1990, they starred together in Edward Scissorhands, Burton's suburban fairy tale, which took in over $86 million worldwide and froze their romance into cinema.
How do you feel about making with Johnny?
Well, I'm looking forward to it. It means we get to spend more time together at least. And, I'm a little nervous, but that's understandable. I think it's going to be really fun.
She was 20, she had already been Lydia, Veronica, and Kim, and she was exhausted. She had shot Welcome Home, Roxy Carmichael, and Mermaids back-to-back, picked up a Golden Globe nomination for the latter, caught the flu, and flown to Rome to play Mary Corleone in The Godfather Part 3. She never made it in front of Coppola's camera. A doctor diagnosed nervous exhaustion and sent her home, and she said she did not want to give a substandard performance and let everyone down, Coppola replaced her with his own daughter, Sofia, who was then blamed for practically the entire film. But that is a story we already covered in Sofia Coppola video. I love all these overlaps. And here is the domino you did not see coming. Winona spent the next year convinced Coppola hated her, and when he finally invited her over to clear the air, she brought along a script she had been carrying, James V. Hart's adaptation of Dracula, and on her way out the door she said, almost apologetically, "If you have a chance, read this script." By her account, he glanced down politely, saw the word Dracula, and his eyes lit up. That is how Bram Stoker's Dracula happened. The lavish, blood-soaked, wedding-gowned fever dream of 1992 exists because a 20-year-old actress was trying to apologize for getting the flu. She played Mina, and she clashed so badly with Gary Oldman on set that she has referred to it as trauma. A reminder that the gothic romance on screen was, behind the camera, mostly attrition. Then Scorsese called, and everything changed. The Age of Innocence, 1993, put her in corsets as Mae Welland, the smiling blade of old New York, and won her a Golden Globe and her first Oscar nomination. She calls Scorsese the best director in the world.
A lot of people think she was manipulative or she was mean. A lot of people think she was the victim and innocent. Basically, she was a combination of all of that.
1 year later, she swung the pendulum completely. Reality Bites, 1994, thrift store dresses, a documentary camera, and a haircut we will discuss at length later, because women carried her photo into salons all across the planet. That same year, she played Jo March in Little Women and earned her second Oscar nomination before turning 24. But 1993 also brought Petaluma back into her life in the cruelest way. When 12-year-old Polly Klaas was kidnapped from a slumber party in Winona's old hometown and later found murdered. Winona had gone to the same junior high. She put up a $200,000 reward, joined the search, and when it ended in the worst way, she dedicated Little Women, which had been Polly's favorite book, to her memory. You see, she took the machinery of her fame, the thing she found most alienating about her life, and pointed it at a grieving town. That is character. And what was happening inside her, well, all of this was happening outside. Nothing good. The engagement to Depp ended in 1993, and she has said plainly that she was very depressed after breaking it off. He famously had the tattoo edited down to Wino Forever, which the press treated as a joke, and which I would like you to sit with for a second, because a man surgically removing your name from his body, while the whole world watches and laughs, is not actually a joke. She once fell asleep with a lit cigarette and nearly burned down her hotel room. She has called it her wake-up call. She had suffered panic attacks since the age of 12, from, in her estimation, the pressure of working while going through adolescence on screen. And at 19, she checked herself into a psychiatric clinic for depression and exhaustion, saying later that she really thought she was going crazy. The detail that breaks my heart. She said the worst part was not being able to describe it. The overwhelming horror of the anxiety attacks, even to her own family. She told Diane Sawyer about seeing herself on a Rolling Stone cover that called her the luckiest girl in the world, while she was in so much pain that it broke her heart. Remember that phrase? The 90s certainly did. She kept working, of course. The Crucible in 1996, with Arthur Miller himself on set. Then Alien Resurrection in 1997, where she went spiky and fought xenomorphs, because the decade contained multitudes, let's just say. She dated Soul Asylum's Dave Pirner mid-decade. Then Matt Damon from 1997 to 2000. Introduced, in the era's neatest bit of foreshadowing, by her close friend Gwyneth Paltrow. Winona and Matt, Gwyneth and Ben, late 90s Hollywood's ruling couples, all cheekbones and premier flashbulbs, which brings us to the coffee table. You have heard this story, everyone has. The legend goes that Gwyneth, visiting Winona's house, spotted the script for Shakespeare in Love lying around, pursued the role behind her friend's back, won it, and took home the 1999 Best Actress Oscar that might have been Winona's, ending the friendship in the process. Now, as always on this channel, we deal in what can be verified, so let me be precise. This story is contested and unproven. Gwyneth has flatly denied it, calling it an urban myth on Howard Stern, and a 2025 biography reports her claim that Winona herself started the rumor, along with a nickname for Winona too petty for even me to dignify, and I have a high tolerance for petty. Winona, for her part, has never publicly told her version. What we actually know is this. 2 of the decade's most famous women stopped being friends. An Oscar sits at the center of the wreckage, and Hollywood has been dining out on the ambiguity for 25 years. Sometimes the myth matters more than the fact, and we will come back to why this one stuck so hard. Because first, we have arrived at the film this whole video orbits, Girl Interrupted. This was not a role Winona was given. She literally built its world. She read Susanna Kayson's memoir of her stay in a psychiatric hospital and recognized it so completely that she tried to buy the rights herself. Columbia got them in June 1993, and the project then sat in development hell for 5 years, with 3 scripts written and none satisfying her. She partnered with producer Douglas Wick, took an executive producer credit, and personally chose the director, James Mangold, after seeing his tiny debut feature, Heavy. She was not playing a woman in a psychiatric institution. She had been one, and she said the role mirrored so much of what she had been through that she was terrified to play a character full of fear and anxiety, knowing those things were not past tense for her. This was the most personal bet of her career. And then the supporting role had to be cast. Reese Witherspoon auditioned, so did Christina Ricci, Katie Holmes, Gretchen Mol, Kate Hudson, Alicia Witt, Sarah Polley, and Rose McGowan. The part of Lisa, the magnetic sociopath down the hall, went to a 24-year-old named Angelina Jolie. Elizabeth Moss, who was also in the cast, remembers the set splitting into a Winona camp and an Angelina camp, and Jolie kept her distance entirely, which Winona later read generously, saying Angelina needed to see only Susanna, not Winona. Generosity is one reading, strategy is another. When the film came out in 1999, Angelina did not just steal her scenes, she walked away with the Best Supporting Actress Oscar. In Winona's own passion project, the film built from Winona's own psychiatric history, the torch was not passed, it was taken, and the decade's crown moved from the waif to the panther overnight. I made an entire video about the other woman in this story, about Gia and Girl Interrupted, and how Angelina weaponized exactly the danger Winona kept trying to survive. The link is in the description and in the card above. Watch them as a pair. They are one story, wearing 2 faces. Well, you know what comes next, and I promise the ending is stranger, sadder, and more redemptive than the tabloids ever told you. Before we open that dressing room door, one small ask. If this channel gives you something, consider becoming a member. For the members-only podcast episodes, special emojis, a badge next to your name in the comments so I always spot you, and early access to every new video. To the members watching, you are the reason I get to spend my weeks doing this, and I am grateful for every one of you. Los Angeles, December 2001. Winona Ryder walks into Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills, and by the time she walks out, security has her on camera, removing tags from merchandise and placing items in her bag. She is arrested and charged with grand theft. $4,760 of goods, itemized in the press down to the last absurd detail, from a $760 Marc Jacobs thermal top to one pair of $80 Donna Karan cashmere socks. Police found prescription drugs on her. Her attorney explained they were prescribed painkillers, and the records largely backed him up. Her own account of that period is bleaker than any charge sheet. She had broken her arm in 2 places months earlier. A doctor she calls a quack had overprescribed, and she describes a weird point when you do not know if you are in pain, but you are taking it. The country lost its mind. People magazine reported that news of her arrest topped coverage of a rumored capture of Osama bin Laden. 3 months after September 11th, the biggest story in America was a 100-pound actress and a handbag. In 2002, she was convicted of felony grand theft and vandalism, and the judge gave her 3 years probation, $10,000 in fines and restitution, 480 hours of community service, and mandated counseling. No jail, telling her it was not his intention to make an example of her. Which is almost funny, because the entire culture already had. Now, here's where my t-shirt comes in. Within weeks of the arrest, an LA gift shop owner named Bill Wyatt printed a shirt that said, "Free Winona," and it became the hottest item in the city. And in June 2002, Winona appeared on the cover of W magazine, wearing the shirt herself. The stylist Joe Z said she loved the risk of doing something different, and she loved the picture. Think about the nerve of that. Pretty cool to have turned the punchline into a self-portrait. That is the single most Winona gesture of her entire career, and it is why my shirt for this episode is inspired by that moment, not the scandal, the reclamation. The industry did not applaud the nerve. By 2003, an insurance company reportedly refused to bond her for a Woody Allen film, and she had become, on paper, too much of a risk. So she left. She went home to the Bay Area, sat in on constitutional law lectures at Berkeley, fell down rabbit holes of etymology, and climbed 180 feet up a redwood to visit the activist Julia Butterfly Hill, who had lived in that tree for over 2 years to keep it from being felled. Winona lasted 6 days up there and was the first to laugh about the difference. Years later, she said the forced stop was almost like the best thing that could have happened, because she had never before asked herself whether it was okay not to act, whether there was anything else. Of the era that broke her, she said only that it was a kind of cruel time, that there was a lot of meanness out there.
I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I think they generally produce their worst work when they do that.
So let us do what this channel exists to do, and ask what she actually was. Camille Paglia has one mention of her in a 1997 Oscars column, and it was dismissive, filing her among the unprepared girly girls. Winona was small, pale as paper, hair the color of ink, all pupils and nerve endings, beauty that seemed to come up from a cellar rather than down from a sun deck. And she carried Paglia's androgyne too, the beautiful boy flickering inside the gamin, the ability to look like Audrey Hepburn's haunted little sister, a Victorian ghost, and a skate kid within the same week. Apollonian beauty is gregarious, it asks to be admired. Chthonic beauty asks to be understood, and it makes you slightly afraid you might. That fear, I think, is exactly what the culture was managing when it laughed at her mugshot. The writer Alana Massey said the definitive thing about all this in her essay, Being Winona in a World Made for Gwyneths. Her argument? Winona and Gwyneth are not two actresses, but two archetypes. The woman placed on the pedestal, polished, aspirational, faintly hollow, versus the woman you actually identify with, awkward, a little bit strange, emotionally uncontained. For girls of her generation, Massey wrote, Winona was both relatable and aspirational, the rarest combination in the fame economy, and Massey rereads 2001 with a scalpel. The arrest was the moment the culture discovered its dream girl was actually unwell, an inconvenient reality it found easier to handle through punchlines than through sympathy. Male stars of the era bounced back from far worse. Her reputation, Massey argues, never fully did. Winona herself said it more simply, years later. She is so sick of people shaming women for being sensitive or vulnerable. And the whole fragile thing, those qualities are real in her, and there's nothing wrong with them. Half of Hollywood spends a fortune performing invulnerability. She could not, and it turned out the audience never wanted it anyway, which is why her face mattered, and why it still does, so let me keep my promise. Here is the practical Winona Ryder breakdown, the part of the blueprint you can take into your own bathroom tonight, if you like. It's all just for fun, you know? Let's start with the hair, because the hair is the legend. The Reality Bites cut, the choppy bob pixie hybrid with the textured fringe that stylists now call the Bixie, came from no celebrity salon. She cut it herself all through the 90s, and described her method to Elle with total honesty. She literally put her head upside down and went at it with the scissors. Women brought her photo into salons around the world, and she said she was surprised and flattered. The lesson is not to invert your head over a sink, please, but this. The cut works because it is undone, off-center, wash and go. A haircut that says, my mind was on something more interesting, and I just did it spontaneously. It's like an adventure. Now the face, and here we have something rare, an actual step-by-step. Because the beauty house, Violet Grey, had makeup artist Kira Nasrat, excellent name, reconstruct Winona's 1994 Golden Globes look, the sleeveless black dress, the pearls, the win for The Age of Innocence, sheer, light powder foundation, buffed from the T-zone outward, kept thin so skin still looks like skin, brows brushed up first, then filled softly along their natural shape, a shade softer than your hair. The strong natural brow is the anchor of this entire face. A cream eyeshadow pressed onto the lid with a finger, then a second shade blended upward in circular motions for what Nasrat calls perfect imperfection at the edges, which is the whole Winona philosophy in 4 words. Mascara with the biggest brush you can find, because, as Nasrat put it, the bigger the eye, the bigger the brush, and Winona's eyes are the main event. And then the lip, which in the Winona system is binary, nothing at all, or a full pigment red. What I can recommend as an evocation is a Revlon blue-based cherry red in a matte finish, the closest translation of the jet black pixie and cherry lip she wore to the 1997 Oscars, to my mind her single best beauty moment. Cool undertone, matte texture, everything else on the face kept quiet. For the wardrobe, the codes are just as learnable. Black leather jacket, white tee, straight leg jeans, lace-up boots, the definitive 90s formula. Hers before it was everyone's. Slip dresses in black, and vintage, always vintage. She wore a $10 dress to the Oscars once, and rewore favorite pieces, so often the press commented. To which her philosophy was simple: things are not meant to be worn only once. And the menswear, the boys' 3-piece suits she loved since Bugsy Malone, the same silhouette she was once beaten for wearing, transformed into a signature. If you take one structural idea from her closet, take that one, the thing they mocked you for is usually the thing to double down on. And notice what is absent from all of this. Trend, effort, expense. The entire blueprint is a 5-item vocabulary, spoken with total conviction. So what is Winona's advice to us? She never wrote a manifesto, but she left instructions all over the record. question authority. Her godfather, Timothy Leary, coined the phrase, and she calls it one of her favorites. Keep your standards devastatingly high in love. Her parents were madly in love for 45 years, and she has said she would rather never marry than divorce. Maybe refuse the needle. When people pointed at her forehead, she answered that she had been waiting so long for those lines to arrive. Rewear the dress, read the book, and cut your own bangs at least once. And when they print the joke about you on a t-shirt, buy the shirt, put it on, and look straight into the camera. I've queued up the next chapter for you here. I'll see you soon. Love, Kira. Now go create your own blueprint.